But FantasyHub and Steven Plappert were one and the same. And so I put everything I had into that company for 3 years. You made so many sacrifices and you're walking away, not with nothing, right? Once you get the perspective, you can say, well, I had all the learnings and I'm just like you. I'm so grateful for that experience. I wouldn't change it for anything.
I'm Matt Tate, founder of Decimal and fellow entrepreneur. Yes, I'm one of the crazy ones. I've chosen time and time again to hustle my way through that first million. Now, I'm scaling to the next 50. So I know firsthand what the messy middle is really like. And I know that entrepreneurs and leaders like us need a destination for empowerment, community, and encouragement. This is our place. This is After the First Million. In today's episode, we chat with Steven Plappert, co-founder and CEO of Forecastr, about his entrepreneurial journey and adventurous spirit. Steven shares insights from his startup experiences, highlighting the parallels between business growth and personal challenges. From childhood influences to fundraising triumphs, I'm excited for a candid discussion with Steven. We're going to cover a variety of topics, including resilience, learning from setbacks, and the power of hands-on experience. Steven's story offers valuable lessons and inspiration, whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or a budding explorer. Plus, it's not every day that we get to talk about things like Mount Kilimanjaro and death threats. Steven, thanks for joining me, man.
So pumped to be here, man. I appreciate the opportunity and I'm excited for this one.
All right. You and I both know that to start a company or run a business, you've got to be just a little bit crazy. So tell me, when did you know that you were one of the crazy ones?
That's a great question, and I think it's so true. And you would think, because I'm a third generation entrepreneur, that I would have known it at a young age, but I honestly didn't. So my grandfather is an entrepreneur up until the time he retired and then passed, and my father's still an entrepreneur, runs a payments company. It's in the blood for me. I was always wanting to emulate my dad from a business perspective, but I went through college and I wasn't really thinking about starting a business or entrepreneurship. I was a little bit more straight and narrow, I think, at the time, to be completely honest with you. And when I graduated from college, I was taking interviews with like JP Morgan and stuff. I wanted to go into big finance. But then my best friend at the time, Andrew Musa, he gave me a call. It's like, hey, I was thinking about this idea for a fantasy sports company called FantasyHub. He started telling me about it. I was like, man, that sounds really cool. We should give a shot at that. And so it's just kind of an organic thing that really came from Andrew giving me that call. And, it all just snowballed from there, I guess.
No, that's awesome. I have to say, just knowing you, I cannot imagine you working for a JP Morgan or something like that. Tell me about your first company. Tell me about how you began as an entrepreneur.
Totally. Yeah. And you're dead on with that too. It's like, just to paint a little bit more of a picture there. When I went to college, I thought it would be an actuary is actually where I started. And I went to do some internships and I quickly found, at least the guys that interviewed me, they were a little bit sterile, a little bit stale, and I'm a pretty colorful guy. And so it just really didn't jive. And I was like, well, this isn't going to be for me. Maybe I'll go into big finance. And I went down that path. I'm so glad I did just stumble into entrepreneurship because I definitely feel like it is just right for me. It's super hard. You have to be really gritty. You have to be crazy. You have to be really capable, but you can kind of look how you like and be how you like as long as you hit your numbers, which I really like about it. I can be myself. So yeah, FantasyHub, it was a daily fantasy sports platform, just like a DraftKings or FanDuel or big names in that game now. And we just saw a big opportunity. We were early in that space. We were a few years behind them. And Andrew came to me with that idea and we got it started. And one of the things I think is really cool about that journey is my father and Andrew's father were very fortunate. They each put in $25K to start that business. They're like, we treat this as your MBA. If you were going to go get an MBA, we'd give you 25 grand to support that. We were lucky to have families like that. And that's exactly what FantasyHub was for me. It was like just a crash course in business. And it was a trial by fire, where we're right out of college. We're building this consumer gaming company. It's legally ambiguous. So the business model was shit, very difficult business model to pull off daily fantasy. We can kind of get into that. It's just a learn on the job type of thing. And I can't tell you how many times I skinned my knees in that journey, just not knowing what you don't know and really feeling like I knew more than I did. That was one of the biggest differences between FantasyHub and Forecastr is that FantasyHub, I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I really know what I needed to do. I thought our success was guaranteed. I spent so much time doing stuff. Then I look back on, I'm like, oh my gosh, you were just wasting your time. You had no idea where to direct your energy. You made so many mistakes. It was just a crazy kind of roller coaster of a ride, FantasyHub was, but it was a daily fantasy sports company. And it was ultimately a 3-year journey, and journey that took me down to Austin, Texas, that took us through Techstars. We were the first Kentucky company to ever get selected into a Techstars program, which I take a lot of pride in because Kentucky is not known for, its entrepreneurial ecosystem. And there's been plenty of Kentucky companies that have gone through Techstars since, but we were the first. And I think that's pretty neat.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things I kind of want to dive into, and you and I share I want to say a terrible and awesome thing that not everybody has. You and I have both started companies that failed. And when I look back at it, like you, it was my MBA. It was a great experience. I'm really glad I did it, but it sucked. And it was really hard, and failing, you have to be humble. Now, I think like you, I look at it as it's one of the best things that ever happened to me. I needed that. It's been a great thing that's helped as I've built Decimal, and just like as you've built Forecastr. But go back to why was it hard? Go back to the tough part.
In one sense, for me, I'm a very privileged man. My family always had enough money. We weren't the wealthiest family on the block, but we had plenty of money. And, I was always pretty athletic, and I was good academically. I had plenty of friends. And I didn't really face a lot of adversity in my childhood. I had a pretty idyllic childhood. Things always just worked out for me. I was the kind of guy that could just coast and get A's, and I was fine. FantasyHub failing was my first big piece of adversity where, hey, this thing, you put everything you had into, you put everything you had, and it failed, and you're walking away with nothing, so to speak. That was a really, really hard pill for me to swallow, I think, was just that kind of failure. And in a lot of ways, as I think a lot of entrepreneurs do, first company or otherwise, your identity gets tied up in the company. It's difficult to separate Steven Plappert from FantasyHub, or even today, Steven Plappert from Forecastr. I'm much better at doing that now. But FantasyHub and Steven Plappert were one and the same. When that company failed, I felt like a piece of me had died. I put everything I had into that company for 3 years. So I think that was the hardest thing, was just coming to terms with this thing that you poured all your heart and soul into for years. You made so many sacrifices, and you're walking away, not with nothing, right? Once you get the perspective, you can say, well, I had all the learnings, and I'm just like you. I'm so grateful for that experience. I wouldn't change it for anything. But in the moment where you're in the pit of despair, it feels like you're walking away with nothing, and it feels like a piece of you had died. That was very much exacerbated by the way that we failed. It was a very public failure for us. It got covered on ESPN. So there was a lot of pain that came from that as well. And I came back home from Texas to Kentucky, where a lot of people didn't know. They just knew that I had this very public failure. So I had a lot of relationship capital to build that back up and that kind of stuff. So it was gnarly.
Mine was a very quiet and burning failure. Yours was public. You guys were actually doing pretty awesome, and then everything just tanked. Talk about the kind of what happened in the aftermath.
We were doing well for sure. We raised a $1.1 million seed round in the same year that DraftKings and FanDuel both raised about $500 million in their Series D and E. So a little bit outgunned for sure, and went through an NFL season there, which would be our last, and had a really interesting situation happen, which I think is useful for the group to hear, which is that we had an investor do $800K of that round, but demand to tranche their investment, $400K up front, $400K after 30 days, based on us doing what we say we were going to do. His story was that the last company he invested in took the money, moved to Mexico, never heard from him again. Well, I don't know if that's true to this day, but just be mindful of that. Long story short, we never got that second 400K because in between that 30-day period, the New York Attorney General came out, spoke against the space, said that they were going to put a cease and desist out, and basically regulate the space, which cascaded into other states as well. So we started getting a bunch of cease and desist letters, which never came to be. And sports betting's legal now, and so all's fine and dandy. But this particular investor in that moment in time, he wrote the company off, and he not only didn't give us the 400K he was contractually obligated to give us, he even went so far as to draft a lawsuit just to sue me on the basis of securities fraud, that we knew what the Attorney General was going to do weeks in advance and didn't disclose it. None of which is true. Of course, we disclosed, out the walls there of the legal risk. But that's where it all began for us, was like thinking we had a certain amount of capital, all of a sudden having significantly less. And so we were all of a sudden going to run out of money near the end of the football season rather than having space to raise at the end of it. So That was a big lesson I learned, which is that you got to pick your investors really careful, and you got to be really careful about the deals that you do. But yeah, that kind of started this 6-month failure process where I thought I was going to have time to raise after the season. I didn't. So I had to go right back into fundraising after closing that round, which I did. I was able to get some commitments put together, about 250K, but I made the really hard call as the founder that this 250K wasn't going to save the company. It was going to throw good money after bad, and it just wasn't going to work. So we made the really tough decision to shut down. And that's where things got really gnarly for us. So I'll say a few things about that. So in fantasy sports, you're holding people's money, right? You have two accounts. You have your operating account, and you have your player deposits account. And you do not mix those accounts, right? You'd never take player deposits, use it for operational purposes, et cetera, right? Which we never did. Thank the Lord. We did not make that mistake. And so player deposits were safe. But in the carve out for fantasy sports, you had to guarantee the prize pools. And so if you had a game running $10,000 in prizes, but you only got $5,000 in entry fees, you had to cover that gap. There was a gap called overlay. It was viewed as a marketing expense. And you would move that from your operating budget into your deposits budget on a monthly basis, book it as a marketing expense. Now, where we made a big mistake, Matt, in the final days of the company, probably the last month or two, we didn't have the cash to move that overlay over. But we kept running games. We were young founders. We were like, we're going to make it. We're going to raise this round. We're going to shoot the gap. Yeah, we know we're taking on this risk. We're going to be fine. Now, when everything crumbled, when we couldn't raise the round, we couldn't support it, and we had to shut down, we could refund everyone's deposit. No one was going to lose any money, but we couldn't meet everybody where their account balances were. We weren't funding that last couple months of overlays. We couldn't do that. And so we ended up going into this period where for 6 weeks, we had to negotiate a deal with one of our other competitors to cover that gap, right? To cover that liability so that we wouldn't have to go out and publicly basically say, hey, look, we can't cover this gap. And that's where things got really gnarly for us, because during that 6-week period, we really couldn't say anything to the market about, until the deal was done. We were working a deal with DraftKings in the background and stuff like that. And so there was a 6-week period where we were not running games. We had shut down the site. We were negotiating this deal with DraftKings on the back end. And the public forums where these fantasy players would congregate, where the rumor mill was running quick. The rumor mill was the FantasyHub founders are crooks. They've taken all our money and run. They were blah, 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 blah. And it got really bad where I was really, a big face of the company. There was a lot of death threats going on in that forum. My father had death threats mailed to his mailing address. Somebody found his address and posted it in the forum. So he was getting paper mail, which was really scary, obviously, for him, that people said they're going to kill his son. My now fiance, Emily, was getting Facebook messages from people saying, hey, your boyfriend's in a lot of trouble. You guys need to get away. You guys need to move. You guys need to run. This was all going on during a period in time where my business was failing. My identity was shaken, and I was trying to negotiate this deal with DraftKings to make it all right. But it was a really hard 6-week period. And, all's well that ends well. We got the deal done with DraftKings. Everybody was made completely whole. We transferred all our cash over to DraftKings. They filled the gap in overlay, and everybody was able to get their full winnings, which is great. And it's a tale for those listening. Don't make the mistake we did when you're insolvent, shut down. It's hard to make that decision as a founder, but never put yourself in that kind of risk, and build relationships with your competitors and do it early, because that's what we did. And had we not had that personal relationship with DraftKings, we would have never gotten a deal like that done as quickly as we did. Then things could have turned out a lot worse for me. So yeah, it was about as tough of a failure as you can go through, I think, as a first-time founder. So
I can't imagine how hard that is. And another kind of fascinating connection point between you and I is, at the time, my wife was the executive director of the Indiana Game Commission. And so you probably got a cease and desist letter from my wife at some point.
no way.
We'd have to check with her, and now she's a national gaming lawyer. But that whole time frame of sports betting becoming legal, I mean, you're talking about $1 billion industry. That's a crazy time. And I don't know about you, but when my company failed, I needed recovery time. Once it all got done, you're right, it's like losing somebody. It was grieving. I needed time to recover. What did you do after everything was finally said and done? That 6-week period of hell is finally over. All the assholes have gotten paid, and luckily DraftKings came in and you were able to work that deal. But what did you do personally?
I'm not afraid to say I was completely depressed. I was so depressed, in fact, that my parents were so afraid that I would do something drastic that my dad actually came down to Austin in stealth and monitored me for a week. I didn't even know about it until after the fact, that he was down there basically hiding in the bushes, making sure I didn't do something permanent. So it was bad. It was really bad. And I moved back home with my parents for a little while. And to be honest with you, Matt, for about a month, I didn't do anything. I laid low, played video games and read some books and just really tried to just be at peace, process and reflect and just get through it. And once I had gotten through that emotion, which took about a month or two really to really process everything, I started to get a broader perspective. I started to realize, hey, like, I'm okay. I have my health. I have my family. I have my loving girlfriend. I'm okay. Things are going to be okay. I did do a piece with Little Business First to just come clean on, hey, here's exactly what happened. So, it's a lot worse than you think it is. That's something I did for myself for my kind of social capital, is to say, hey, look, I'm gonna set the record straight on what actually happened here. So people aren't thinking I'm some big crook. So I did that. And then I ultimately made a decision that would lead me to start my next company, which is that I decided I wanted to go spend 6 months in the woods. I decided I wanted to go hike the Appalachian Trail. It was something that I wanted to do for quite some time. I had grand delusions of getting FantasyHub to the point where I could take a 6-month sabbatical and go hike that trail, which I now know was never going to happen. But when that company failed, I was like, look, this is creating a perfect transition point in life for me where I can go spend 6 months in the woods and have the experience of a lifetime. And it was that decision that would actually lead me to starting Forecastr in just the strange way that life works.
We prepped last week. I asked you a question, and I've asked it of myself, so I felt comfortable doing it. But it was like, why in the hell did you do it twice? Like, why'd you start another company? It was a learning experience and a great one, but also it was a miserable, terrible, you said it, depressing experience. So why in the hell did you do it twice?
I think the answer for me is that once I had the benefit of perspective and I could look back on FantasyHub, not in kind of the pit of despair, from a level-headed perspective, I think I really just came to terms with the fact that I loved it. I really did. I loved that experience. And what I loved about it was the combination of it being so outcomes oriented, where like, if you hit your numbers and get it done, you can kind of be who you want to be. I really love that aspect, I think, of startups. And then probably more than anything, I like being in charge of my own destiny. I've always beat to my own drum. I've always been a pretty heavy individualist. I've always been a unique kind of guy. I don't look or act just like anybody else in a lot of ways. And so, I've always just had that originality to me, I guess. And for me, that's what drew me back to doing it again. It was just like, not like as much as like of a power trip of wanting to be in charge per se, but it's like wanting to be in charge of my own destiny, like wanting to be the guy who's shooting the shot at the end of the game. I like that aspect. Sometimes that pressure's hard, but I like having that pressure. And I like creating, I like building. And I'm not an artist. Both my brothers are artists, visual and musically inclined. So they're really the creatives in the family, right? But this is my creative outlet. You know what I mean? My creative outlet is building a business and creating something from nothing. And it's a rush, man. I've always been an adrenaline junkie as well. And so there's no higher high than when your business is working and you get that big sale, or you hire that awesome person, or that employee comes to you and say, hey, it's the best job I've ever had. Thank you so much for starting this company. It's like, those are the things that really just like, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about them. And the highs make the lows worth it. I didn't want to do it right away. And I knew that. Like, after FantasyHub was done, I was like, I'm going to start another company, but it's going to be years from now. I'm not going to start it right away because that was stressful. That was hard. And I don't want to do it right now. I want to go get a job and clock out at 5 o'clock and chill. Exactly.
I don't know about you, but I've also come to the realization that I'm a really fucking terrible employee. And that's part of it for me, is that, like you, I'm an adrenaline junkie. This is my adrenaline. It seems like it's this way for you too. I like leading and empowering other people. I wouldn't want to be a solopreneur. I wouldn't want to do something just myself. I feed off the energy of empowering other people to achieve things.
Yeah,
and it sounds like that's part of you.
I would say that for sure. I mean, it's one of the things that, frankly, I've been able to really appreciate about this experience. We had 8 people, 3 of them were co-founders, and a couple of early employees, and it was awesome. I loved that team. It's such a tight-knit team. It's so fun. But we didn't actually get to really build a solid org. We had no org structure. It was 6 people for the vast majority of the journey, versus Forecastr now at 35. Building that team and like you said, getting to be that leader, that coach, getting to empower people, when people ask me, like, what's your favorite thing about Forecastr, I often have a hard time choosing between the value we create for customers, like hearing customer stories about what we're doing and how it's helping, and the employee side of it. And like hearing from employees about how this is the best job they've ever had, the best company they've ever worked for. They love the team so much. Like those two things are really hard to choose between for me. I really do like love leading the team and like just creating a space that's awesome. And I think that's something that is really unique because if you think about work is the most of our waking hours, more or less our work. And so I have the opportunity to create a space at work that's actually fun and actually awesome, you know, and it isn't lame and sterile. And like that to me gets me really juiced.
So you've kind of hit on, and I want to transition this to Forecastr, but one of the things you've hit on here, I want to call out. A lot of our guests on this show aren't tech. They come from more traditional businesses. And you and I, having grown up in the tech industry, my first company was a better idea than it was a business. And so I swore when I started Decimal, I'm going to build a good business with good economics, and we're going to make money, which those founders and those successful entrepreneurs that have come on here that aren't in tech, that's just a natural starting point. But with you too, Forecastr feels like a much better evolution of creating a business in addition to an idea. Does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense. And I am right there with you on it. Like FantasyHub, I mean, it clearly is a successful business model in the sense that DraftKings and FanDuel nailed it. Now, that business model really wasn't much successful. It's more of a stepping stone to a sports book, which is a cash cow. So that's what we were all trying to do. We just didn't make it. But that was a big theme for me as well in my next business. In my next business, there were two things that I knew I wanted to do. One was it had to be good fundamentals. Like I didn't think about business model at all before I started Fantasy. I was just like, that sounds fun. Let's do it. Cool idea. The next one, I'm like, no, it's got to be good, strong fundamentals. So I was really serious about that from the get-go. We took the company through a lot of paces before I was even willing to launch out of the CFO shop that we incubated the company at and actually run the company because I wanted to de-risk the company. I wanted to make sure that, hey, like, there's going to be strong product market fit here. There's going to be good unit economics here. I had the wisdom of experience to be thinking about those things. So that was one thing, like good, solid fundamentals. The other thing though, for me was passion. Like I was never a big fantasy sports guy. I like sports as much as the next guy, but I wasn't like, yeah, fantasy sports. It was just the idea that was thrown to me and Andrew was my best friend. I was like, let's do it, man. And it was awesome. But like my next business had to be something I was super passionate about because if you don't have that passion, you'll give up. It is too hard to get yourself up and get to work and work hard every day, all day, you know, for a business if you're not really passionate about what you're doing, in my opinion. So for me, it had to be passionate. It had to be strong fundamentals. And that's what I ultimately found in Forecastr.
Well, and you are a great example of resilience. And I'm guessing that part of that is just honed from growing up, part of it, the adventurer in you, but like running a business, starting a company, building a product is, I always joke, it's 75% of it sucks and it's terrible and you get knocked down, but the 25% makes it totally worth it. But it's a hard thing to do. And one of the things I find fascinating too is you have, and at least started with a good service kind of component, the like, hey, this is going to actually make us money while we do this part. And the economics of that. Talk about building the beginning of the business. And then let's talk about after the first million, as you actually started to have to build a company versus an idea.
I think one of the things that has led to such a solid success for us so far at Forecastr is just like the really level-headed way, the systematic way that we've built the business, which starts from those strong fundamentals and like orienting around really making money as you build the business and just not taking calculated risks. So it's like when we first started the company, Logan and I had the idea, we were working at a CFO shop called Venture First, phenomenal company. We had the idea, but instead of just starting it right away, we did a ton of customer discovery. We built a prototype. We went to Venture First, invested in the company, and allowed me to spend more and more of my time on Forecastr while on the payroll to raise a pre-seed round for the company and fund the company with 18 months worth of runway before jumping over. So it's like a lot of really calculated steps to make sure that like the company was de-risked. We'd have 18 months to hit our first milestone. We had 18 months before we even hit the starting gate. to make sure that we kind of had our ducks in a row. A much more mature approach to building the business for me the second time around, which led to our success. And so that led to us starting the company in January 2020, 750K in the bank. And we had gotten the company into Techstars, which was another intentional, calculated move. Like, I knew Techstars was one of the biggest entrepreneurial, organizations in the world, biggest communities in the world. I knew from going through Techstars the first time that financial modeling was a piece of their curriculum and a weak point. I was like, if we get this company into Techstars, Techstars will exalt us to the entire community and will be an enormous arrow in our quiver, be enormous wind in our sails. And that's exactly what's occurred. And so it was just very intentional every way through. And that 750K is really grind it out, stand the product up. And like you said, on the services side, we meant to launch the product 6 months after we raised that round, and we didn't get the product out for 13 months, which is very stressful. But after that 7th month, when we still didn't have the product out and it was still going, Logan and I were like, look, like, we're not going to get to our revenue milestones if we don't do something here, because we're going to run out of money in 18. This product's still not out. What are we going to do? And we had this kind of idea. We're like, well, look, for years and years, we sold Excel-based financial models. Let's just start selling Excel-based financial models as pre-sold annual subscriptions to our platform, which we will import once we launch the product, which is exactly what we started doing. And so, like, for the back half of that year, to the point about services, we were just running a services business. We would sell a financial model, we'd build it in Excel, we'd ship it to the customer, and we'd say, hey, once we launch the product, we'll get you on there as an annual sub. We sold 100 of those financial models in that 6-month period for $1,000 a piece. That was $10,000 in MRR. And we didn't get the product out until January of that next year, when I had 5 months for the runway. So I was launching the seed round right there. I was launching the seed round, having just freshly launched the product, but also already being at 10K MRR and showing investors that, hey, I view an obstacle as what can I do to get around this, not as absolute. I'm like, hey, product's not out. Okay, no big deal. I'll do this instead. So that scrappiness they really loved. We were able to raise that $2.5 million in 6 weeks. And that $2.5 million gave us the capital, the runway, that kind of thing, to just really continue to grind hard, continue to focus on distribution, and get us up to that first million. We got to that first million with that 2.5. And then here we are now. A couple of years later, we hit that million.
No, that's awesome. Now, one of the other things I like to talk about is once you hit that first million, you've gone from the idea and the hustle of like, oh, we can do this, to then like, oh shit, I got to actually build a company. That's a new thing for you. That's a new thing for your company. Talk about that transition. When did you first realize that you transitioned out of the like flat org structure into like, all right, we need to build a company here. What are we doing?
Interestingly enough, it really was around that kind of first million for us. We're pretty much flat. We had just like me and Logan as founders, one other kind of executive, and then just employees. It's about 1.5 years ago when we created a director level, like a middle management layer, and created some more structure to the org. And Logan and I started to float up. The company had grown to the point where it was very difficult for Logan and I to simultaneously manage all of the day-to-day inner workings of the company and have any time to be thinking strategically and thinking about the future and thinking on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis, on a multi-annual basis. Like, we were stuck in the kind of the daily, weekly, monthly zone. It was very organic, I think, for us when we started to feel that, because it's uncharted territory for both of us. Logan, this is his first company. Me, my first company failed me at 8 people. So this is uncharted territory for us. And so it was really one of those things where you just kind of feel, hey, like, this is becoming too much to manage. We really need to create some structure here. And we were big believers in promoting from within. We had great people from within. So we leaned into that. But I also have to give credit to the fact that, like, I think one of the things that we've done a good job of, and one of the things I'm a big proponent of after my first company, was like surrounding yourself with people where it is an uncharted territory. Matt, you and I have had plenty of conversations when I look up to you as someone I really respect. I've gone to you for in certain situations to get your advice. And I've done that with others as well. It's really important as a founder that you surround yourself with other smart founders who have played the game and maybe who are a little bit ahead of you on the ladder, so that you can talk to them and so you can get their wisdom, And so I think that was something we also did, was like, specifically founders, like entrepreneurs who are building businesses in our sphere, keep them in the know about the company. So I think they kind of help bubble up some of those insights as well, saying, hey, you might need to start to look at growing up as a business. Yeah, I felt different, you know what I mean? I felt like I've been able to float up and actually be a CEO in practice rather than just a CEO in title for the first time in my career. For the first time in my career, I really feel like I've been able to move into more of that coaching role. And I didn't know how I'd feel about that, to be completely honest. I'm a pretty hands-on guy, but I've loved it. I really have loved just kind of leaning into others. And like you said earlier, trying to lead and empower and like figuring out how to get the most out of people and make sure they're happy, healthy, and productive at work. It's been a fun kind of new challenge for me, which I've really enjoyed.
One of our first guests talked a lot about is how when you have a fast growing company, the job changes every 6 months. But you don't learn that fast. As a CEO, you're always like behind, right? Where you're like, all right, as soon as you feel like you finally get the role, then the job changes again. And you're like, oh shit, I'm starting over. And what I've found to be hard and something that I've needed to focus on is, like you mentioned, finding those support structures, like actually focusing on me as a person. And for me, I found a great coach. And I also found a good peer group that meets regularly. And I've found good mentors and keep in touch with other founders like you. But what is your personal support system? Like, how do you help yourself continue to grow and be better?
As far as just personal support, I have to say that even just, structures like my fiance, Emily, is a huge supporting system for me for just keeping me happy and healthy and in a good mood and things like that. I mean, she does so many things for me that I think really do help me stay in a position where I can grow. Because if you don't have that kind of stable foundation, there's no real way to grow on top of that. So I think that's one thing for me that I've really, and that's what one of our cultural values at Forecastr is, to live with balance. Like, we're really big believers in that you don't have to sacrifice everything in life to build a great company. In fact, it's unwise to do that. You really want to live with balance, and you need to kind of take care of yourself outside of work to be your best self inside of work and to be able to grow inside of work. So that's something I think I've done really well this company is I have set hard guidelines on kind of like when I work and when I don't. I really try to stick to that the best of my ability. And so I've managed that, and I've really kept a lot of things going outside of work that I completely deprioritized at FantasyHub, which have allowed me to grow and to be my best self at work. So that's one thing for me. And then really for me, Techstars has been a huge support system for me. I mean, Techstars is such an amazing community of entrepreneurs and just people that really get it. They've been there. And so I have so many founder friends that, having gone through Techstars twice and just being such a big part of the Techstars community in general, that I can really lean on. So there's a number of founders that, like, for example, have gone through Techstars Anywhere that are higher up in their growth journey that Logan and I have tapped pretty regularly when we find ourselves in a situation where maybe we need some help, or just generally try to keep tabs on them to just, I don't know, grow through osmosis, just kind of see how they are doing things, see what they think about things. And there's this kind of natural lift that comes from that. But one of the other things I think that's been really helpful for me is having kind of seasoned execs on our team. So like our CTO, Eric Schreiner, he's a decent amount older than Logan and I, and he's been through a couple companies and he's scaled a couple companies. And I respect Eric so much. Like, he's just got so much wisdom and he's so good with the people game. A CTO or non, he's one of the best in the people game, but to be a CTO and to be so good at the people game like he is, it's incredible. And so like, he's really helped Logan and I grow a lot as well on the daily, because he's right there in the thick of it with us every day. And he's just seen stuff that we haven't seen. So, I really have to kind of give credit to him as well, because he's really helped lift Logan and I up when it comes to like what it means to truly be an executive and to truly float up to that level. That's been super helpful too.
Oh, that's awesome. One of the other things you keep mentioning, and I think it's a unique part of your journey that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, is both companies, you've had co-founders. And at Forecastr, you have Logan, an awesome dude. But a lot of people start a company solo, or they don't have a co-founder. Talk about the impact of having a co-founder and how that's helped you in your journey.
For me, like, Logan, he's my rock. He's everything for me. Like, he's like the guy that I just know I can talk to about anything at all times. Like, if I'm freaked out, I know I can talk to Logan and he'll just calm me down, because our yin yang is like Logan, I mean, he feels emotion more than he'll show it, but he's just like a steady Eddie rock of a person. Like, he's just right down the fairway all day, every day. He's so consistent emotionally and otherwise. Like, he's just like, he just is that way. I'm more like, dude, all be super high and super low lows, and that has its pros and cons. And so I feel like we have this really nice balance where I'll be stoking things to the max and kind of pull Logan up, or like I'll be really down and he'll pull me up. And so we just have this really nice balance. But I think having a co-founder and someone who like truly knows everything about the business in the way that you do and is truly a peer in the business. No one else is a peer in the business like a co-founder is, even if they are on your executive team. There's a really special relationship with the co-founder because of the history. It's so critical. And I'll say this as well. In both companies, I had co-founders, and in my first company, FantasyHub, Andrew was my best friend and we became co-founders. I love Andrew to death and he does me, and we're still best friends. And like, he's going to be the best man at my wedding in September, but we're not going to work with each other again. There was a lot of friction in that. And like, the company really ate the relationship completely. It consumed it almost completely. It almost, in my mind, destroyed that relationship in a way. So another kind of side benefit of FantasyHub failing, Logan and I got the chance to work with each other for years before starting the company. We knew that we worked really well together. And so starting the company was a lot less risky even in that respect. So I think co-founder relationships is something really special. I think they've kept my head on straight more times than I can count. I think they're really, really important. And I think you got to get them right, because if you don't get them right, it can just really cause a lot of pain and it can kill a business. It really can kill a business.
How has your guys' relationship evolved as you've gone from an idea to now a growing company?
Logan and I's relationship is really interesting because we had worked together for a few years before starting Forecastr, but very much as colleagues. When you start a company together, in our case, it's a brotherhood. We are so tight, and like I spend more time with Logan than really anyone else for the most part. I mean, Emily probably would be one person I spend more time with, but I don't know. It's close. I spent a lot of time at work. Like I spent a lot of time with that guy. And I'm very lucky in that we just get along super well. We've never really had a dust up or a fight. We're very aligned on a lot of things. We have our disagreements about stuff, but so I'd say like the relationship and how it's evolved, kind of like a marriage in some ways. It's really just a rock solid kind of relationship. There's a lot of comfort in that relationship for me, where like we have a weekly founder sync on Mondays. In that 1 hour, I feel like anything goes. I feel like we can talk about anything. I feel like we can just totally open up. We can totally take the mask off, so to speak. You know how like a marriage, like the longer you go on, there's just a fondness that develops there because of a shared experience. And I feel like that's where we're at now, is we've gone through so much together. There's so much fondness. There's so much comfort there. It's just a really special thing.
You mentioned having gone through so much. And one of the things I know that you've had to go through is you started a technology company January 2020. And the landscape of fundraising, something that is the lifeblood for a lot of technology companies, dramatically changed between now and then. And raising that first round in 6 weeks was not the time period it took you to raise the second round. And it became a lot harder as that landscape has changed. And one of the things you mentioned with Logan is that in your meetings, you can take your mask off. So as you went through those hard times, which is an and job, as CEOs, we have a lot of ands. We got to do this and this and this and this. And we do have to wear a mask sometimes. Talk about how you dealt with the fact that it was hard and you're building a business. You have a lot of ands going on. It's stressful. And yet you also have a team that you have to keep motivating to move forward. How did you deal with that?
We raised our latest round last year. It was a $4.5 million round. It took me almost 7 months to get that round done. And that was a really long time. And for the first time in the company's history, we got into what I call the danger zone, which is less than 6 months worth of runway. We were very fortunate. The 4.5 years now the company's been around. Just that last summer was the first time we ever got less than 6 months worth of runway in the bank, which is the opposite of FantasyHub. We never had more than 6 months, but it was because that round took so long. Had I closed it in 3 months, we would have been fine, but it went down to 7. So when you get down to a few months of money in the bank, even if you know you're close to a deal, it is stressful. That's really when you start to feel the heat. So there's a lot going on there. And so there's two things I think that really come to mind with this topic. One is I limited my ands. What I mean by that is Logan is an incredibly capable co-founder, and I am very fortunate in that Logan is very capable of running the entire business. Well, I could die today and like the business would be worse off, sure, because I'm a great person, but like Logan can run the business. And so I literally, for that 7-month period, all of my responsibilities within the business shifted to Logan. And like he ran the entire business for almost that entire time. I participated in weekly executive syncs. I participated in our like, not even always, like occasionally in our weekly, our weekly team calls and stuff like that. But Logan ran every department. He made pretty much all the decisions. I connected with Logan. He consulted me on stuff, and like I would still be in Slack, here and there, blah, blah, blah. But everybody knew like Steven's out raising the round. So I really isolated my focus to raising the round so that I could limit my stress and limit my overwhelm and like bring my best self to every single investor meeting, bring the heat, bring the passion, bring the good answers, bring the confidence to ultimately raise that round. That's, I would say, is one of the ways I managed that was by really trusting Logan to run the business. And he did a phenomenal job at that. And then the other thing, to be completely honest with you, is really just to get comfortable with the fact that like when you're taking on extra work, it goes back to the live with balance thing. Like I really am serious about setting hard boundaries for work and really trying to not bleed over those. When I look to raise capital, it's like I really have to have that unplugged time, right? That time over the weekend when I'm not thinking about the business. I'm just playing Zelda or out on a hike or whatever it is, time away from the business where I can recharge the batteries. So I would really say those are the two things that kind of kept me in a good headspace. And I was raising that round and feeling that stress and needing to be my best self for the team, because the way I run my team is I'm very honest. I'm very transparent. I'm that way with the team internally. I'm that way with investors externally. But the only way that works is if you make sure that in those moments where you are honest and transparent, especially about hard things like being low on runway, you're not in a pit of despair. You need to be speaking about things from a positive standpoint, from a confident standpoint, not from like oh shit, guys, I got 2 months worth of runway, because that'll scare people. And as a leader, you can't do that. I'm very honest with people about the challenges that we face and where we're at, but I want to make sure that I'm in a good spot to paint that in a good light. And the only way I know how to like stay in that good mindset is to manage my workload and my stress load. And so that's to offload things to Logan, and also just to take time away from work where I really can not be working, so that I can recharge the batteries and get back to full speed.
So part of your recharging is some pretty cool stuff. You hike the whole Appalachian Trail. It's not a small thing that a few people have done. I've done 2 days worth on it, and I can't imagine doing the whole thing. But you've also done a couple other pretty cool experiences. Tell me what those are.
I did climb Kilimanjaro in 2019, which was really awesome. Yeah, it was my first time in Africa. I had a blast. It's a great experience and something unlike any other. If you haven't had a chance to go over to Africa, it's a really phenomenal place. And that mountain is something to behold. I mean, you can easily see why an indigenous population would assume that God lives on the top of that mountain, because it just lords over everything. And it just absolutely looks like a place that God probably lives. I mean, that was a really awesome experience for me.
Steven, I really appreciate you taking the time today and being honest and transparent with us. I do have one final question for you. You had to go back to when you first started and give yourself a piece of advice you have now that you've been in company building, something you hadn't done before. What would you tell yourself?
It's all about the people. It's such an easy one for me. It's all about the people. It's just every game is a people game. Everything you're doing is a people game. If you get the people right, you're good. And that doesn't just mean employees either. Like in my early career, I saw the world just more narrowly. Like I was saying, even as a college student, I'm the same way. Very more transactionally. I was more like, hey, well, I'm not going to take this meeting unless I get something out of it. And I was just thinking at that kind of more basic level. But there's something Techstars really taught me, which is that like, it's all about the people. It's all about the network. It's all about building relationships. There's just so many ways that can come back to help you in a 1 + 1 = 3 type of scenario. It was a really big kind of unlock for me late in FantasyHub's journey that as a CEO, as a founder, one of your main jobs is just to get out and evangelize, to tell everybody about what you're doing and to build a community, to build a tribe. And I've taken that to heart, and I've taken that through Forecastr. We've got a phenomenal community built around the company. It has helped us in so many unexpected ways. And the other piece on the people part is that it's just every organization, it just boils down to a group of people. That is what every organization is built out of. It's people. And so when you're thinking about investors, people think that investors do this number crunching game to figure out who to invest. They don't mostly. They look you in the eye and they say, do I like this person? Do I believe in this person? Is this person convincing to me? That's a relationship thing. That's an emotional thing that investors are largely doing. When it comes to partnerships, when it comes to brokering a deal with a big company, it's all about a personal relationship in a lot of ways. Yes, you got to create value and all that kind of stuff, but it's that relationship that's really going to get you special treatment and then internally within the business. Like, if you get the right people on the right seats of the bus, doing the right jobs, like a lot of things take care of themselves. That's what I would definitely go back and tell myself. It's like really convince myself in the earliest of stages that like prioritize the people. And that's why one of our values at Forecastr is put people first. That's one of our values, put people first. It's kind of heart and soul of everything that we believe. So,
Well, I love that. Focus on the people, relationships, and building your own community. Thanks so much for listening. After the First Million is presented by Decimal. To listen to more episodes and find tips to help make running a business easier, visit decimal.com/AFM. Want to join the conversation? Reach out to me on LinkedIn and let's explore the messy middle.